Howdy, and welcome to the PHLY Draft Show with Fran Duffy here on a beautiful Tuesday, ready to discuss the draft prospect outliers on defense after the wonderful conversation we had last week about the offense. Fran, how you doing? Looking good in pink.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited for this one. You know, we went into last week saying, all right, we're gonna surprise each other. We're not gonna. We want the raw emotion, the raw reaction to be here on the show. And we talked about it after. We're like, man, I wish I could have done a little bit more. I would have bounced off you a little bit better here. So this one, we know exactly who each other are bringing to the table, and I feel like I'm so much more prepared. I have so much more info and data to share for these prospects. So I'm excited for this conversation.
I think maybe the biggest outlier in this entire draft, relative to, just to remind you, if you were joining us for the first time, we're sort of talking about the sample of the elite players in the NFL, where they came from. So guys who made a first-team All-Pro or a first-team or like an initial Pro Bowl roster over the past 12 years or so. What were their production stats in college? Like, where did they get drafted? What kind of athletic testing did they have? And relative to that sample, Shemar Stewart stands out like nobody else in this class. And so let's talk about the good first, and we're talking, of course, about the pass rusher from Texas A&M. A 40-inch vertical jump and a 131-inch broad jump. Those are fantastic numbers.
Yep.
The broad jump is the second best of anybody in this elite sample, and that would be Hassan Reddick at the top. And the vertical jump is like the third best after Cam Wake and Connor Barwin. Myles Garrett in there as well. So he is explosive as an athlete. But from a production standpoint, 3 years playing at the highest level, 4.5 total sacks for an edge rusher. Never a season with more than 1.5 sacks.
1.5 each year.
1.5 each year. You look at all these guys, the lowest, and it's the player who everybody points to as, if traits matter over production, Danielle Hunter from LSU, of course, when he was coming out. Now, Danielle Hunter only played 2 years, I believe, and he had 3 sacks in a season. He also had 4.5 total, but he at least had 3 in a season. Chandler Jones his best year was 4.5 sacks. Michael Bennett, who went undrafted, he had 3.5 sacks as his season high. That's it. Everybody else is, in a totally different stratus. So, what do you make of Shemar Stewart? How do you rectify? How do you justify using a first-round pick, maybe a top 25 pick, most likely, on a player with that limited production from a stack standpoint?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And so, when I'm looking at, let me take you back to the beginning for me for Shemar Stewart, where, obviously knew about him coming into the season. He was a former 5-star recruit, was in a lot of the 2 early mock drafts, and was viewed as one of the top defensive players entering this 2024 college football season. When I first studied him back in the fall, I watched a couple games and I thought, yeah, this guy's a day 3 guy. I was just watching. You see traits, you see the length, you see the strength, you see the explosiveness. Certainly in the open field, his ability to play in pursuit, some good flashes of his motor, but not a guy that consistently finds the football. Not a guy that consistently shows that ability like stack, shed, get off, and get to the ball in the run game. It just, again, a guy that at the top of the rush doesn't consistently win. There's some stiffness there. We'll get into all this, but the lack of production certainly stood out. And as I watched him in the fall, I said, all right, well, he's got some time to turn it around. Let's see, what this looks like by the time we get to the end of the year. Obviously, he only finishes with 1.5 sacks. But going through more of the numbers as the season comes to a close and you get through all-star games, you get through combine. The other thing, it's not just pass rush production, because we'll always look at, all right, well, QB hits and the TFLs, and there's other ways for guys to produce. There's a stat that's called a run stop. Okay. Which is basically when a run is an unsuccessful play. So you think if it's less than 50% of the yardage, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it's like less than 50% of the yardage gained from the. So if it's 1st and 10 and the run goes for 3, that's an unsuccessful run. If it's 3rd and 2 and the run goes for 1, that's an unsuccessful run. So you just kind of understand, like, okay, what's a successful run and an unsuccessful run? If a guy makes a tackle and it's an unsuccessful run play for the offense, that's a run stop. That's how PFF describes that. It's a good metric. He had 21 run stops on 575 run defense snaps. So one of the things I'll do is I'll pull, because PFF will give you all this raw data. It's up to you to decide what you're going to do with it. So I'll go, all right, all of his run stops over how many run defense snaps he played. I do this for every single pass rusher where we have the data drafted over the last decade. I've got 204 edge rushers in that sample, drafted last decade that have been charted by PFF. He would rank 203 out of 204 in run stop percentage.
Yikes.
Right? So we're talking a guy that doesn't get to the quarterback, doesn't finish there, and he's also not making plays against the run. Now, he's stout, he's strong, but again, when it comes to like actually making plays on the ball, he's lacking.
And so when you are watching him on film, do you see excuses for that? Is there a schematic reason for that? Are teams running away from him and designing their offense to not worry about it or to try to take him out?
Yeah, there are certainly some things that you can do to kind of explain some of this away. So I've got a lot of notes here. So, all right.
I think to me, he is the most interesting.
I think he's the one
puzzle to solve.
Yes, he's the guy you really want to kind of hammer out. The big thing too, really quickly, he ran a 4.59 at 267 pounds. He was listed at 2. He played north of 280, and it was like, oh, he's going to be this freak athlete. 4.59 in the 40-yard dash at 267. That's a good number. Mm-hmm. We talk about like the speed score. That's 120.3 speed score. That's a good number, but that's like 80th, 85th percentile. That's not like, oh my God. Like
right. Like if you're gonna excuse the lack of production, you want this guy to be like no one who's ever played before.
Yeah. Now,
like,
the jumps, as you mentioned, those were elite. Did not do shuttles. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Now, the other thing that I will do, and again, you take all this raw data in, one thing that I will do for all defensive players, I have what's called a production score this is just in my sheet. Just give me a sample of an example of, all right, what does a guy do to get to the football? For defensive linemen, I look at tackles, TFLs, sacks, hits, and hurries. I kind of adjust them in terms of priority. So like sacks, a sack is worth more than a tackle, so on and so forth. Similar kind of formula applied for all defensive players. On a per snap basis, he's in the single-digit percentile in that sample. 21 guys in the last decade are down there with him. Only 3 of them went on days 1 and 2 in the draft. So typically, if a guy doesn't produce at that level, if he's down that low on the production score, usually doesn't go high.
Do you have who those guys were?
Sure do. Peyton Turner went in round 1.
Okay.
Bust. Chad Thomas.
Poor guy.
No, sorry. He's
by.
still playing. He could turn it around, I guess.
He could turn it around.
Chad Thomas went to the Cleveland Browns in round 3. Didn't work out.
That was
the other
nicer.
one, and this one, the other one, and this is actually a very interesting comp. Dio Dengbo, who's built very similarly, 35 and quarter inch arm, 86 and 3/8 wingspan. He had 8 sacks and 29 starts. He also had low efficiency marks. It took him a couple years coming out of Vanderbilt, went to the Colts. He signed a big deal with the Chicago Bears. I think that's an interesting comp there. But again,
let's ask that, because that is kind of my question with Shemar Stewart is in this draft.
Yes, right.
What if he's just a third down pass rusher inside? Like,
is that worth it?
Is that worth it? Like, and is that the best use for him? Can he bulk up a little bit, move him inside, and maybe he makes more of an impact there?
Where I view him as having the most impact is when he is lined up out wide, kind of like how Peyton Turner has been used, honestly. And this is how I viewed Peyton Turner. I've compared him in the past to like Marcus Davenport, who the Saints also drafted in the first round. They traded up for him out of UTSA. Line him up out wide and just let him just pin his ears back and go and just try and push the pocket that way. Use that length, use that explosiveness. That's where that can show up best and be most effective. So that's kind of how I have viewed him the best. Now, one of my early comparisons for Shemar Stewart, when going back to when I first studied him, was Zach Harrison. Zach Harrison came out of Ohio State a couple of drafts ago, so I think it was the 2023 NFL draft. Like Shemar Stewart was a 5-star recruit at Ohio State. He was billed as a future first-round pick. The film wasn't there. He ended up falling to early day 3 to the Atlanta Falcons. He played off the edge his first year, and then last summer, going into year 2, they kicked him inside to defensive tackle. So that could be a potential path there as well for Stewart.
Chase Daniel Plainview says, wow, guys, I was watching my favorite draft show with my good friend Peyton Turner. He just excused himself, and I hear him crying. Real nice.
I'm sorry, Peyton. Now, so you asked the question of why. Why? So to me, there are 2 things with the lack of production with Shemar Stewart. Number 1, I don't think he's very good at the top of the rush, just in terms of like winning with his hands, having an overall pass rush plan. And that can be corrected, that can be fixed and developed. The other one, I think he's just stiff. When you talk about like the lower body flexibility, in his knees and in his ankles,
that flexion,
he struggles
baby.
to turn. really good straight line.
Which goes to the jumps,
yeah,
right?
It goes to the jumps. That's that straight line explosiveness, but struggles when he has to turn. So let's go into it. So I mentioned that 21-player sample, the guys that did not produce at a very high level. Actually, no, here we go. Let me do it this way. All right, so top of the rush. We'll start there. Pass rush win rate. That's like kind of the way you kind of look at that. All right, who are the guys that are pass rush win rate? Anyone under 12.5% in their final season, that's like single-digit percentile. So we're talking like, all right, this guy just does not win at the top of the rush. Out of that 21-player sample, only one of them went in the first round. It was a former number 1 overall pick in Deon Walker. Just one guy went on day 2. That's former Eagle Deshaun Hall coming out of Texas A&M. So 19 of the, I know, great pull. 19 of those guys went on day 3. So again, if you are not winning at the top of the rush, you typically don't go early in the draft. So again, we're also talking like these small samples of guys that even get considered to go this high. That's what makes Shemar Stewart so unique. Now, the guys that all hit that were single-digit pass rush win rate percentile players: Deon Walker, Josh Sweat, Charles Omenihu, DJ Wanham, Dorrance Armstrong. Now, a bunch of those guys, again, were day 3 picks. What was very interesting, I looked at that sample, and what are some of the similarities between those guys? They were all 34-plus inch arms. They were all 4 out of the 5 were in the 90th percentile in wingspan. Shemar Stewart checks those boxes.
Yeah.
When you look at the rest of the single-digit sample, only Miles Cole, who was a late-round pick last year, also hit that. All the other guys busted out, like did not work out. And they didn't have that length. So it's like, okay, like if you have that length, that gives you some hope about what that could be. So I thought that was really interesting.
And just to say, he 34 and 1/8 are his arms. He's got a big wingspan, 6'5", 267. So he does check that box.
No question. Now then we get to the stiffness, and this is the thing where it's like, all right, like he's got the pro day on Thursday. So we're recording this on Tuesday. Pro day's on Thursday. We'll see if he does shuttles. He did not do them in Indianapolis. He did get hurt midway through the workout, so he might have done them. I don't know if he would have chosen to do them or not. Weight adjusted 3-cone. So I talked about this last week. How I look at there's the speed score, right, where it's like basically it's accounts for your weight when it comes to all these times. You just take that same idea and just apply it to the 3-cone. You apply it to the short shuttle. I do that with the 10-yard split, all that stuff, and it just gives you a weight-adjusted idea of how this guy performs. When you're talking 3-cone, that's a lateral agility test. Deon Walker was in 90th percentile, weight-adjusted 3-cone score. Josh Sweat was 80th percentile. DJ Wanham, Dorrance Armstrong, Omenihu, that was the sample of the players that we talked about earlier that hit, that didn't have the high win rate. They were all 50th, so they were all at least 50th percentile. Same thing with the short shuttle. All those guys were at least 50th percentile. So if Shemar Stewart does the shuttles, you kind of need him to show that he's going to be in that range. The other one, and this is where I think that the stiffness really shows up with Shemar Stewart, he has a missed tackle rate of 27% on his career. That's extremely, extremely high number. Josh Sweat, he was the best from that small sample of guys that hit at 8%. Deon Walker was the worst at 17%. Again, he's 10 percentage points past that. So only 2 out of 203 pass rushers graded in the last 10 years, only 2 of them had a lower number. There was only a couple of the guys that were in the single-digit percentiles, Jared Verse and Leatu Latu. Both those guys had production through the roof. So they were always at the ball, and so they missed on some plays, but again, always finished on the ball. So
yeah, the picture that paints statistically that he doesn't get to the ball, and when he does, he misses a lot of tackles. That's not ideal.
It's not ideal. So that's what when I'm looking at Shemar Stewart, it is a very tight needle to thread if he's going to hit.
And so if you're a team,
yeah.
What do you need? Like, why would you make that bet? What would be the reasons for doing it? How would you sell yourself on it? Is it a player development thing? Is it we believe in the length more than anything else? Is it in this draft there are no surefire bets, and so we might as well bet on the guy who has these traits?
Yes.
What kind of? Yeah.
All of that. Yeah, I think it's all of it. I've asked some scouts about him as a kid. Everyone says, yeah, like he's not a bad kid. Like, hard worker, he checks the boxes there. It was not. I think people will excuse away like the environment in Texas A&M. It was a new staff this past year. Mike Elko coming in as the new head coach. I think everybody likes Mike Elko, but it was a crazy environment, let's say, under the previous coaching staff. there was a lot of personalities on that coaching staff, and it was a little crazy. His first 2 years in college, and so you can explain, say like Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan was at Texas A&M, didn't put up huge numbers there either, and then he goes to Ole Miss and he blows up. So I think when you look at it, there are ways that you can explain things away. That said, because some of these things, and that's the thing, you always have to. It can't just be by the numbers. You have to go back to the film. Josh Sweat, we talked about this with Josh Sweat when he was coming out, was, he didn't have the efficiency metrics weren't always there. The numbers weren't always there. And it's like, look, he was asked to play a lot close to the tackle, close to the formation. Same with Trayvon Walker and that Georgia scheme. That wasn't really the case for with Shemar Stewart. He had a lot of plays where he was lined up outside. So it's going to be tough. It's a lot of interesting discussions around this player, certainly leading up to draft weekend. And
so bottom line for you is most likely you would let someone else take him.
I'm letting somebody else take that swing. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Good conversation. Let's talk about the rest of the edge rushers who pop a little bit. We have someone asking about Jordan Burch. He's on your list.
Yes,
Why is Jordan Burch someone who's an outlier?
Jordan Burch,
from Oregon.
Yes, from Oregon, transfer from South Carolina. This is a guy that was on Bruce Feldman's freak list for the last couple of years. Physically gifted rusher. Not again like production score below average in my personal production score, but he's still. He had like 8 or 9 sacks this year, so we're not talking. Yeah. So not something that you're like, oh man, this guy never gets to the quarterback. The big thing that makes him an outlier for me. So one of the things I've tried to do over the last couple of years, obviously we get all this data during the NFL season from all over the place, right? There's Next Gen, there's PFF, there's True Media, there's everything, and so I try and cherry pick certain stats that, all right, if we use these during the NFL calendar, we're using during the season, how much of that can I apply to draft evals? And the one that started picking up some steam over the course of the last few years when it comes to pass rushers, how often are guys able to create pressure on the quarterback in under 2.5 seconds? How are they able to quickly win? So I'm like, all right, am I able to do that? Well, PFF, they have that ability to say like, all right, well, the time to pressure for all of these guys. And so with Jordan Burch, I'm able to see like, all right, what's the percentage of pressures that happen in under 2.5 seconds? For Jordan Burch, it's just 58.4% of his pressures. That is an extremely low number. That's in the single-digit percentile. That makes him an outlier. Anything 59% or below is in that range. So the guys that have gone day 1 or day 2 with numbers in that area, it's not good company. I'm just going to roll through the list real quick. Jermaine Johnson, who's probably the best player on this list, a first-round pick for the Jets. Tyus Bowser never hit his ceiling for Baltimore. Tyree Wilson, DJ Johnson from Carolina. Kamoko Toure out of Rutgers goes to the Indianapolis Colts. Peyton Turner again. LJ Collier, and then Felix Anudike-Uzomah from the Kansas City Chiefs. It's not a great list there. Of the day 3 guys, a bunch of them are on there, and only 3 of them hit. Your boy Anthony Nelson,
nice.
DJ Wanham, who it took some time but eventually hit, and then Dorrance Armstrong. So we've hit on a couple of these names already. Now, Burch is bigger than most of these guys. His production is middle of the road. So it's all about expectation. You mentioned earlier about the role for Shemar Stewart. Is he better kind of kicking inside? I think that might be Burch's best thing. Is like, all right, like, hey, third down. I don't think he's a full-time player, but on third down, let's kick him inside and we just let him. He's part of our rush packages. Let him go. I think that's his floor, and you hope that he can become something more than that.
Okay. Let's talk about Mike Green from Marshall, and you tell me whether you think arm length and hand size matters for an edge rusher, because Mike Green, 32-inch arms. That is bigger than only Melvin Ingram in that sample. It's pretty far towards the bottom. And then 8.5-inch hands. There is nobody who has had hands that small. Does that matter for an edge rusher?
I'll say the way I said it last week.
You probably don't want both, but
yeah, you probably don't want both. I'll always say it's like the measurement stuff isn't a problem unless it's a problem. I do think with Mike Green that does show up at times, and so really quickly, just looking at the arm length measurements, the 34. So the 10th percentile mark amongst all edge rushers drafted in the last 10 years is 32 3/8. So Mike Green fell below that, obviously hitting at 32-inch. There are 34 guys that have hit at 32 3/8. So it's a 34-player sample. Only 6 of them have turned into impactful rushers. Marcus Golden, Nick Herbig, Carl Lawson, Trey Hendrickson, Aiden Hutchinson, and then Tuli Tuipulotu. So that's like your group. A couple of round one busts in there. You know, Derek Barnett didn't hit his ceiling. Charles Harris didn't hit his ceiling. Kayvon Chase on a bunch of day 3 picks. So that just goes to show, like, typically, if you got really short arms, you typically fall into day 3. Mike Green probably not going to fall into that range. So if you just look at that range, or at that small sample of the guys that did hit, and I compare Mike Green to that group, 4 out of the 5 were 90th plus percentile in pass rush win rate.
Okay.
4 out of the 5, all but Tuipulotu for both these things, were 80th percentile in pressure rate. Hendrickson actually had the highest pressure rate of all pass rushers drafted in the last decade when he was in college. And when you look at the 3 busts, only one of the 3 cleared those thresholds. So I'm like, all right, like, let's see if this how this applies to Mike Green. Mike Green, his pass rush win rate was in the 80th percentile, so just short of that threshold. So not a bad number. Yep. Pressure rate was below 50th percentile.
Ooh.
Didn't hit. So here's my thing with Mike Green. And I said, when I studied him back in the fall for the first time, before we got like the official measurements at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine, I was worried that at his size, he was not like the physically imposing athlete or like power player that would be needed to kind of like overwhelm.
6'3", 251.
Yeah, that like, and with that length, I was like, all right, like what? And honestly, I had the same questions about Ezeraku at Boston College. Ezeraku's got really long arms for a guy that guy that size, so that length that's not necessarily an issue for him. With Mike Green, I do think that can be an issue for him at times.
Okay. Does that show up for? We're talking about day 3 prospects, also the short arms, Ashton Gillott and Jack Sawyer.
Yeah,
that does show up for those guys.
Yeah, I think so. I think with Gillotti.
Gillotti.
Yeah, Gillotti.
That's great.
I love that.
Delicious.
Yeah, and I will say, he's one of my favorite like day 3 rushers.
Okay.
He like knows where his bread is buttered. He's a guy when you watch him, you're like, this guy knows that he's got short arms, and he knows how to navigate around that. I don't think he's got some like great ceiling, but I think he's going to play in the league for a long time.
He can't reach the ceiling.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, but look, he's got all that custard on top of him. No, but I think when you're looking at Gillotti, like I think that he's going to fall to day 3 most likely because he just doesn't look the part. When you talk about the lack of length, he's not a plus athlete, but this is a guy who knows how to rush. He plays extremely hard. To me, like he's one where he will be able to get past that. With Mike Green, I have some questions there, and then that's obviously not even taking into account like the off-field stuff that you got to worry about with Green.
I want to ask you about James Pearce Jr.
Yep,
from Tennessee. Runs a 4.47.
Yeah,
which is blazing, and in the sample of elite players, that's the 3rd best 40 time, but only a 31-inch vertical jump, which is towards the very bottom of that sample. So, what kind of athlete are we talking about here?
So. Real quickly, the speed score with James Pearce Jr., a bunch of guys hit this mark, right? So there was a really high number. He's in 90th plus percentile. Most of the guys that hit. Like Myles Garrett, Odafe Owe, Trayvon Walker. Really the only guy that went round 1 that like where he was that fast, that explosive at that size, is Lucas Van Ness, who has been a disappointment so far for Green Bay. When you get into day 2...
I mean, he's no Peyton Turner, but...
Right, well, yeah, who is, though? When you get to day 2, it's more of like a 50-50 proposition there. But there were 8 guys that went on day 2 that had a speed score that high. And then when you get to day 3, there were 6 players that had a speed score that high. All of them missed. So it's basically like, if you are this explosive and you have round 1 tools, typically you hit. Okay. And if you fall to day 2, it's like a 50-50 proposition. Day 3, you're just not a good football player at the end of the day. But you're really, really explosive. Now, of all of those guys that I rolled out 24, there's 24 players in that sample. Only one of them was below the 20th percentile in the jumps.
Yeah.
And that's James Pearce Jr. The only other guy that matched that was Robert Beal, who was a day 3 pick out of Georgia back in 2023. Oh. So it is unique that you would have a guy would be that fast.
What happened?
40 and
has Tennessee had its pro day yet?
I believe so. Yes. Now did he?
His broad jump was in the middle, like probably a little bit below average, but the vert really bad.
Yes, I'm not saying this, but this is not a James Pearce Jr. statement. Now there are things that people like whispers about James Pearce Jr. Oh, like the off field, is he the right kind of guy, that kind of thing. All I'm going to say is that I as I've done this more and more, one thing that does pop up, and it can be a marker at times, is guys that overperform from a testing standpoint. That can be like a marker of a guy that's like high character, work ethic, like because
they're putting in the work.
You're putting in the work to not cheat the drill, but essentially like to get a better test score, right? To cheat the drill, and then the guys that underperform, that can be a marker for like, oh, like did he put the work in, that kind of thing. Some guys just have a bad day, they didn't feel good or they whatever, like they just have a bad day. So I'm not saying that's the case, but that is something that I always kind of keep in the back of my mind as well.
I can't find the results from the Tennessee Pro Day.
Yeah, usually I will get that stuff as we get in the next couple of weeks. Because there were times where I used to like try and chart that every day.
One fell swoop.
Yeah, but there's a hole in the market there. Like no, it used to be like Gil Brandt. He's like, like every day, like Gil Brandt would have that running diary on NFL.com. But yeah, no one's really doing that now in terms of like pro day results.
Okay, last one that I want to talk about on the edge is Landon Jackson, who you are, I think, higher on than consensus.
I think so, yeah.
He had some great jumping results, 40.5-inch vertical jump. I just want to know, like, does that explosiveness show up on film for a guy who had good production but not great production?
Yeah, I think it does to a certain extent. He is a player, and actually, as I was going through the usage numbers with Landon Jackson, I actually think that he is a very similar profile to Josh Sweat. Because of how often he was asked to play over the tackle or just inside the tackle, like tight to the formation. That was a big thing with Sweat when he was at Florida State was, but if you just watch the ones where he's cut loose outside the tackle, he's got that ability to win the edge and get home. That usage affected his efficiency marks when you look at all the win rate stuff and the pressure rate stuff. And I think that's the case with Jackson. All of his pressure rate numbers are bad, like single-digit percentile, like third down pressure rate, third down win rate, all that's like a quick pressure rate. All of that is pretty low when you look at Landon Jackson, but the tools are there. There's high character. Everyone kind of raves about him as a kid, so it's that's an interesting one too.
All right, let's move on to the defensive tackles.
Okay.
We've had the short arm conversation, but I think we have to have it with respect to Mason Graham at the top of the draft. You're talking about a top 5, top 10 pick. 32-inch arms. Jarrell Casey, Geno Atkins are the low bars there. They also had 32-inch arms, but that's the very bottom. In this draft, all of that stuff, does that show up on tape to you? Is this an orange flag, a light red flag?
It does show up on film at times. There were times, just going back through and just preparing for the show, there were times just kind of reading through it, and you can go if you're a diehard and you get access to the draft database, you can see my notes there on Mason Graham. There are times where I worry about the lack of length in the run game. 32-inch arms just clears the 10th percentile for me, which 31 7/8 is the 10th percentile mark for all defensive tackles, interior linemen drafted in the last decade. So compared to all defensive tackles drafted in the last 10 years, he would be probably like 11th, 12th percentile. Now, there have been 34 defensive tackles drafted in the last decade with 32 inches and below. Here are the 6 guys that hit big. Javon Hargrave, Ed Oliver, Milton Williams, Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, Kalijah Cansey. Those were the 6. There were some other guys that hit at like a lower level. They were like role players, but they were more like nose tackle types. We're not talking about that with Mason Graham. We want him to be that Ed Oliver, that disruptive interior presence. Now, of those 6, I have to eliminate Hargrave because I didn't have all... Since he came from South Carolina State, there's not all the full metrics on him from that sample. So you've got 5 guys there in that sample that had those short arms, and were able to hit once they reached the NFL. All 5 of them were in the 80th percentile in my production score. 3 of them were 90th percentiles. These are guys that were always around the football. Graham hits that. All 5 of them cleared 50th percentile in pressure rate. Milton and Kalijah Cansey were 90th percentile. Graham hit 50th, clears that threshold. All 5 of them cleared 50th percentile in run stop percentage. Ed Oliver, Peyton Turner were both 80th percentile plus. Graham hit 90th percentile. So he's hitting all the marks that all these other players hit. He didn't test. They had the pro day last Friday, chose not to test. All those other guys, though, were like 90th percentile speed score, 90th percentile 3-cone weight adjusted, 90th percentile short shuttle adjusted. All those guys were like freak athletes that were always around the ball. So
you're a little worried.
Graham didn't test.
Why not test? Come on.
Well,
I mean, it's not going to affect his draft stock.
That's
right?
the thing.
Yeah.
It's like it can only hurt him.
Yeah.
So I get why you wouldn't if you were him. Now, When I'm watching him on film, I see a guy that's a good athlete. I see a guy that can. I went back again, reread the notes this morning just to confirm. But this is a guy that can win with his first step. You see explosive movements. He's sudden. He's got good change of direction. He's never on the ground. Big time wrestler in high school. So like all the athletic traits are there on film. It's just you got to get over the lack of length. But I think that he clears enough of the thresholds that I'm okay.
Okay.
That was a fun one. Just go back and compare in this draft. Yes, exactly.
A couple nose tackle prospects.
Yep.
Guys who you wouldn't expect to have, great sack production, but let's just check the box on them as well. Alfred Collins, Cam Jackson.
Yep.
Both of them very low on sack production. Just 2 for Alfred Collins for his best in the season, 1.5 for Cam Jackson. The low for all of these defensive tackles is 2. Both of them also red flagged for their jumps. Cam Jackson especially, 24.5-inch vertical jump, 93 inches on the broad. That's way below the standard that we're looking for here.
Yeah.
But maybe you're not expecting a Pro Bowler here, so you're just, I don't want to speak for you.
Well, so the big thing is, Alfred Collins, a 96-inch broad jump, a 26-inch vertical. They are single-digit percentile jumps. Those are bad numbers. But at 332 pounds, weight adjusted, that's actually 50th percentile.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, like that. I'm not super worried there. Jackson was just below 50th percentile, below average number, but still not terrible. And their production scores in terms of per snap basis were like 40th percentile. So it's not like huge red flag. So I'm actually I'm okay there.
Circling back on the arms, does it show up for Tyleik Williams and Jamari Caldwell, who both also have 32-inch arms?
No, I actually think both guys, the lack of length didn't necessarily ding them too much on film.
2 more for defensive tackles. Darius Alexander.
Yeah, this is a tough one. So what's the big one there? I know.
He's going to be 25 years old.
I'm going to hurt you more when we go through this.
The defensive tackles, there have only been 3 of the 33 who entered the league at 24.
Is that draft day or is that
That's September 1.
Got it.
And that's Kawan Short, Henry Melton, and Damon Harrison. Damon Harrison was undrafted. Everybody else, 23 or under.
Yep.
There hasn't been anybody 25. I know that the landscape of college football has changed, but I mean, also playing that long and 4 as a sack season high, I'm a little skeptical.
So the good, real quick, 80th percentile length, 34 inches, 80th percentile RAS score, 9.2. That's the one thing that's interesting that I think gets lost in the RAS stuff. The relative athletic score, Kentley Platt, Math Bomb on Twitter, shout out to him for doing a great job with this. But he'll always say, like, all right, if it's over a 9, that's an elite athlete. But you have to remember that's a sample of everyone that's tested. Not like that might be like, over a 9 might be an elite athlete. But when you're comparing them now to the sample size of who actually gets drafted, that's 80th percentile. That's not like, oh man, that guy's like a freak show athlete in that way. All of his efficiency numbers this year, win rate, pressure rate, quick pressure rate, third down numbers, all that stuff, just over 50th percentile. Production score over the course of his career, under 50th percentile. He's never had more than 4 sacks in a season. He was 2nd team All-MAC this year. He was 3rd team All-MAC last year.
Yeah, production score at Toledo. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay Toledo, but
Sean Payton has this thing that he said. Bill Parcells used to say, like they would never, because when he was in New Orleans, they would draft small school guys.
Yeah.
But if you're watching a small school guy, you better walk on water. That was like a Bill Parcells thing.
Yeah.
I don't think that you necessarily get that with Alexander. Now he went to the Senior Bowl and he looked good. He was good. He was good down there. But the profile is a little bit worrisome. I've got 90 guys that were under 50th percentile in the production score. Okay, so the 184 players, 181 players drafted at defensive tackle in the last decade. So you cut that in half, or the bottom half. Only 2 of those guys turned into blue players, like what I would say, like top shelf players. So that's why, like I've said, I very much value guys that are around the ball, and that's what worries me about Shemar Stewart.
Who are the 2? Do you have it?
Yeah. Deron Payne and Aleem McNeil.
Okay.
The rest of them, some of those guys are.
What did Tom Donahoe know?
Well, look, it was a good evaluation, but that's the thing. So when you're looking at the rest, and it's not, some of them turned into like fine role players, like but again, they were more of like your nose tackle types, like if you're drafting Darius Alexander, I think you're expecting him. He's going to be like a penetrating 3 technique. Get him, he's going to be constantly around the ball. I don't know that's a favorable profile.
Brandon in the chat says, man, who does Fran want? He's talking me out of everybody. But we are talking about the guys with these flags.
With the outliers, correct.
Maybe next week that'll be a fun conceit for the show. Who are the guys who you're willing to bang the table for?
Yeah, we'll do that next week.
Yeah.
All right. See,
not going to do it right now.
See, this is why mailbags are good, because you get that feedback and it sparks.
That's not a mailbag. That's a live comment.
But if
that's
we didn't
entirely different.
But if we didn't have the live comments, we would.
I'm very pro live comments. I've never been anti-comments. Last thing, not on the list, but Deon Walker. I know Zach is a fan.
Yep.
I mean, 6'7.5", 331. He did have a 7.5 sack season 2 years ago.
Yep.
Why are you not so high on Deon Walker?
The film is just very underwhelming. Like
Okay.
he is an extremely up and down player that I was very intrigued by coming into the season, because I was expecting, all right, like he had the big production spike in 2023. What is he going to do as an encore there? And he was just very up and down. For a guy that is that big, he gets moved off the ball so often. His pad level is terrible. So he stands
so
right
tall,
up,
yeah.
and guys get under him and just like eject him from his spot.
We got to see him going up against Kendall Lampkin.
I mean, Lampkin would eat his lunch. I haven't looked at Lampkin had his pro day yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers yet, though.
Save that for a treat tonight.
Yes.
All right, let's go to linebacker.
Okay.
And to me, linebacker is difficult.
This is very hard.
My operating procedure usually at linebacker is that I care about testing the least here.
Yeah, I think that's probably
because
right. Yep.
to me, this is so much about just what do you see, how quick do you move. Like it doesn't matter to me if you're 0.3 of a second slower than another guy. If you're reading the play and you know what's going on, and so this stuff matters maybe a little bit less here. But a couple guys to talk about: Jack Kiser, 24 years old. Not the worst thing in the world. There are 3 of the 35 players in the sample who were 24 years old entering the league. Zach Bond, one of them now. But he's also got short arms and small hands, 30 and 3/8 inches, 9-inch hands. Do you see an athletically limited player when you watch him on tape?
No, I actually was surprised by his athleticism.
Okay.
He's deceptively
And he didn't
athletic.
test at the combine, but
No, but the position workout was really good.
Okay.
And I think you kind of go in and you see the picture, you see the profile, and you're like, all right, like this guy's going to be limited. He's a better athlete than I think, certainly than what I expected, going in. Now, when you talk about that lack of length, there have just been 11 linebackers drafted in the last decade with arms that length or shorter. 6, maybe 7 hit in terms of what their draft slot was in terms of being like a starter or quality backup. So I don't think that's like a huge prohibitive thing. And honestly,
they would be the smallest of all the Pro Bowlers.
Yes.
I mean, maybe it's not a Pro Bowler, but
that's the thing. Is like, all right, I'm not expecting him to be like the super high impactful starter. I do think that he can be like a Mike linebacker and be like a starter for a while. Just not a lot of holes in the profile. He actually has the best missed tackle rate of any linebacker that drafted in the last. It's 179 linebackers charted in the last 10 years.
Feels like that's a position where I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, 4.6%. That's outrageous.
Who are the others? Do you have the other guys who are near the top of that sample? I'll give you a second to think about it.
I can grab that.
Because in a minute we will talk about Go Deeks, Chris Paul Jr. Actually from Ole Miss, but is on the smaller side, just under 6'1", 222, and his arms are somehow even smaller than Jack Kiser's.
All right, so real quickly, Jordan Glasgow is number 1 on that list at 4.9. Now, he was like a special teamer who barely played on defense, but Quay Walker is next up on that. Cody Barton has been a solid backup player.
Yeah.
Yep. Micah Walker backup. Micah Parsons is next. Leon Jacobs didn't hit. Junior Colson's a rookie from last year who was hurt with the Chargers. Jayon Brown, Blake Cashman, Leighton Vander Esch. So, yeah, some guys
pretty good.
hit. Yeah.
All right. Chris Paul Jr. plays like a smaller player?
Yeah. So this is a tough one where, look, when I look at size in terms of the weight for a linebacker, that's small, 222. Under 225 would put you in that single-digit percentile range at linebacker over the last 10 years. 26 players in the last decade out of 237 linebackers drafted. There have been 8 guys that I would say, from that 26, that I would say, all right, this guy hit. So you have Kamu Grugier-Hill, Nate Gary, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Deion Jones, Matt Milano, Jalen Smith, Terrell Bernard, EJ Speed. Those guys are small, undersized players that were able to hit relative to their draft slot. Production scores were all over the board. This is why linebacker is tough from a measurable standpoint, because to exactly what you said earlier. But production all over the board. Chris Paul was right in the middle of that group. Chris Paul was actually the most productive of that group. He was in the middle of the board with the missed tackle rate. That was in the middle. The big thing when it comes to the weight is when you are that small, I kind of need you to be like a great athlete. His relative athletic score, his relative athletic score right now, and until we get updated pro day numbers, was 7.18, which is right down the middle of this group. The guys above him, Camus was an elite athlete when he was coming out of school. JOK, Terrell Bernard, EJ Speed, all those guys turned into good players. But then there were guys below him. Matt Milano was like right there. Deion Jones, Nate Gary, who was a safety. Those guys were below him. So yeah, it's a tricky one. The other thing with linebacker that makes it so tough from an eval standpoint, I just named a bunch of those guys. JOK was like a slot corner at Notre Dame. Nate Gary was actually a safety at Nebraska.
Yeah.
Milano was basically a nickel corner at BC. So all these guys in terms of like usage, I mean, this guy Chris Paul played 90% of his snaps in the box. Like this guy knows how to play box linebacker. That's got to account for something too.
How about Carson Schwesinger?
Yeah, so this one is difficult because of what you mentioned
Your
earlier.
LB2.
Yeah, he's my LB2, but he is an outlier in terms of experience.
Yeah.
Since this is such a mental position, he's only played 806 snaps on defense. That's an extremely small sample. Right around 1,100, that's the threshold for 10th percentile. So he's played 800. Only 4 linebackers drafted in the last 10 years have played fewer snaps.
Is Van Der Esch one of them?
No, Van Der Esch played a decent amount.
Okay.
It was Mark Robinson, who didn't amount to anything coming out of Oklahoma. Channing Tindall at Georgia.
Yeah.
Jack Sitchie there was like major injuries at Wisconsin. Then Alex Anzalone. And the Anzalone one is actually interesting because they are built very, very similarly. He actually profiles pretty well to him, but he would probably test better than Anzalone. He's got an insane production score, but that's not a huge indicator at that position. It's a projection for Schwesinger for sure, but the tape is excellent, and we talked about the profile already, like why he was only a 1-year starter and all that. But that's a tough projection.
All right, last one to ask you about, and this is somebody who's on the high end of these scales. Tyreen Powell, from Rutgers, 6'4.5" and 34 5/8 inch arms. Everybody's always like, in theory, you would love long arms at that position. Changes the passing lanes, stuff like that. Is it enough to intrigue you?
Definitely. One thing, obviously I've got a spreadsheet that charts all of these numbers over the last decade, right? And so there's tabs for each. And basically what I do is I'll color code it, where it's like, okay, blue is like a blue chip player, then green is like a good starter, yellow is a backup, red is a guy that didn't work out in the league. When I sort it by arm length, you see a lot of green, a lot of blue, with some red and yellow mixed in, but it's basically guys that stick. Have a lot of length. So I think when you look at Tyreen Powell, yes, to answer the question, I do think that is predictive for guys who stick. Now, with that sample, guys who are they're typically around the ball that create more impact plays than what Tyreen Powell did over his career. Just the production numbers just were not great with him. There are questions about the athleticism, but if you wanted to me, like Zach Cunningham was a guy who popped up on that list, and I was like, okay, but Cunningham was a first-round pick coming out of Vanderbilt. Maybe it would have been a second-round pick, but by Tennessee. He's not the athlete that Cunningham was. He's probably closer to the athlete that Cunningham was like late in his career. Not quite in Philadelphia, but he's a later career Zach Cunningham. So that's going to be the concern there with Powell.
Okay. Let's move on to corner.
It's a fun one.
I mean, again, we're talking about arm lengths. And this is one where, you rewind it 10 years and you're thinking about Chip Kelly. All he wants is corners with the,
Pete Carroll.
Right. Byron Maxwell, of course, always stands out. It feels like that has changed a little bit in recent vintage. I mean, for instance, Byron Murphy and Trent McDuffie have both made Pro Bowls recently. Derek Stingley, very recent draft picks who all had very short arms and have succeeded in the NFL. Will Johnson, 30 1/8 inch.
Very short.
Very short. That is smaller than all of them except for Trent McDuffie.
Yep.
How do you feel about that for him?
It's the shortest of any corner over 6'1". That's the thing. That's the thing is like most of the guys that did have those short arms that have played and turned into, even if they're not Pro Bowlers, but it turned into like nice competent players. They are all on the smaller side. The Roger McCreary's of the world, the Trent McDuffies, like you mentioned. So team by team, you're going to and this is the same thing with all of these like measurable thresholds. Is okay. Some teams are going to have those prototypes. How hard do they stick to those prototypes? How strict are they? And it's going to come down to like, all right, like what do you project his role to be? if you see that hey, Roger McCreary or Trent McDuffie, we're going to play him in the slot. Length may not matter as much. If you're going to play Will Johnson primarily on the outside, which I think that's what he is, he's an outside corner. That might matter more for you. What's interesting is I feel like because Will Johnson was listed 6'2", and because he was listed as a potential top 10 pick, over the last 18 months, everyone's like, oh, he's a press man corner. He's a great. I actually don't think he's a good press corner. The lack of length is certainly an issue there, but the recovery speed has also been brought into question by some. That's probably why he is not going to run a 40-yard dash before the draft. He didn't run this past week. Apparently, he tweaked his hamstring again. I actually think they're similar, or they're different kind of players, but a similar profile. Marshawn Lattimore, remember Lattimore didn't do anything coming out of Ohio State. Now they're different players. Lattimore was like a straight press man corner where you watch him on film, he's got all the traits. Will Johnson, I want him playing off the ball, let him read everything and jump throws like a Rasul Douglas kind of in terms of, I think he's a better player than Rasul was coming out of West Virginia, but that's similar kind of archetype. I think that's what Will Johnson does best. But that scheme, it's going to come down to, like, do you have the right scheme, and are you okay with a corner with shorter arms? Like, I loved the idea of him going to San Francisco, playing for Robert Saleh. He comes from that tree. They drafted Sauce Gardner, the big long corner. But are they going to have the strict threshold there? That's going to be an interesting conversation.
Are you okay with the corner with short arms?
I'm okay with it as long as I just understand what the role is going to be.
Okay. You want to talk about Shavon Revel from East Carolina?
I do. Can I also bring up one other corner?
Please.
Because this was one that you had actually said, maybe we'll bring him up. We've talked about him in the past. Vince asked me about him out in the
you were lower on him than most people.
Jahdae Barron.
29 and 5/8 inch.
Yeah, so we're talking sub 30-inch arms. So there have been 15 corners with shorter arms drafted in the last decade. Bunch of these guys have worked out. Quandre Diggs, who did have to move to safety, that was more of a speed thing. But Avonte Maddox, Dante Jackson, Michael Carter, Roger McCreary, Marcus Jones. Only one of those guys has played primarily outside corner in the NFL. That was Dante Jackson. So I'm going through the profile. You asked me a few weeks ago, are you more worried about the guys that you're higher on or lower on? And in the moment, I was like, it's probably the guy. It's definitely the guy I'm lower on. Because as I'm sitting here, every time I go past Jahdae Barron on my sheet, I'm like, literally this morning, I was getting my notes ready, and I'm like, I went and I watched every single one of his targets this morning, just every single time he was targeted in coverage. I still feel good about my projection on Jahdae Barron.
You have him as
he's my
cornerback.
He's my corner
10?
12 right now.
12.
Yeah, I view him as a nickel corner, and I think he's a solid nickel corner. I don't view him as high end, impactful nickel corner, and it's been so tough to just say outside of feel. That's one of the things I love about having the numbers is that you're able to kind of say all right, this is a good example of why the Shemar Stewart conversation we had at the top of the show. That's to me a good example of it. With Barron, when I go through, and again, I have everything kind of color coded, a lot of green and a lot of blue in there, and I'm like, all right, this is good. There's only two other numbers that are really
4.39
red. Yeah, ran 4.39, which was not expected. Which goes to I've heard nothing but good things about him off the field. Football character, really good. He outperforms as a tester. That could be a marker there. Only 6.8% in press coverage. Anything under 8.8, anything under 9, that's a really low number. So under 6.8% press coverage. He's almost all off coverage, almost all zone coverage. So he's basically sitting back and just attacking downhill. That's what he does really well. All those guys, when I look at, if I sort that, when I go on my sheet and I look, all right, who are the guys that were also really low in press coverage, and then I'm able to see their other numbers. All those guys had green production scores, great, we're always around the ball, created impact plays. That was the case with Jahdae Barron. I talk about how much I value production. When you look at Barron, now here's the thing. I talk about how I weigh certain things differently. He had 5 picks this year. That was more than he had his previous 4 seasons combined. Go back and watch those interceptions. He had 3 against Georgia in 2 games. One of them was on a tip ball. The other, he was by himself in coverage. There was no receiver in the area. And then the receiver,
Emmanuel Forbes conversation.
The other receiver
happening.
ran into him. It was a big collision at the catch point, and the quarterback Carson Beck threw it right into his chest. I'm not saying that production is fraudulent. You need to be around the ball. That's great. I do think that he is late because there were times even when I saw it this year, but in years past when I've watched him, because I've watched him now for 3 seasons, Jahdae Barron. if he's attacked vertically down the field and he has to try and look and find the ball late, he's very late in doing so. I think that's a reason why I do want to keep him on the inside. He's late to find the ball downfield. I love the aggressiveness. I don't think his instincts down the field are all that outstanding in terms of reading routes coming his way. If he's a corner in cover 3 and trying to navigate all that, I don't think that he displays a great feel for being able to overlap and make those plays in coverage. I think if you're keeping him underneath and you're letting him just go and attack, I think that's a good role for him. That's a tough one. I'm going to be out on a limb there. I'm going to be low on him, and we'll see. I hope he proves me wrong.
Good for you for sticking to your guns.
I watched it again this morning. All right, maybe something will change, and nothing changed.
Okay. How much do you care about ball production at corner? Looking at Azaria Thomas, only 2 interceptions in his career. Does that matter to you?
To a certain extent, yes. The big thing though is he was a 1-year starter.
Yeah.
And everyone knew he was the guy to avoid for that defense. That was a bad team this year. I'm biding time until I get to these numbers. So one thing I'll look at now. Here's the thing that's difficult with all back 7 players, but certainly at corner where we're looking at this, targets. That's a very loose term.
Yeah.
Right. That's a very loose term because
just like pressures.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it's even worse. Okay. So when we're talking targets, because you could be a cover 3 corner playing 18 yards off the ball and a ball's thrown at 10 yards, and that they will count that as a target. Now that said, he was targeted on 10.5% of his pass game snaps. That is nothing. Teams stayed completely away from him. So the fact that because services are so liberal with targets, the fact that number is so low, that's that they completely stayed away from him. Now, one of the things
that's helpful to know. Yeah.
And what I like to juxtapose that with, PFF has forced incompletions where it's interceptions and pass breakups, basically combined. What's your forced incompletion percentage? How often are you creating those plays per target? His number was 21.6% this year. That's a high number. So wasn't targeted often. When he was making play on the ball.
All right.
I like that combination on top.
Oh, we got somebody we like.
There we go. Now, he doesn't run well. I'm worried about his speed. He didn't test at the combine for that reason.
He's got big hands.
He's got big hands. He's got long arms. But that's what people were talking about him in the first round. I'm I don't know. But
do you have? I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have the target rate? Where that who were the other guys over the past couple?
The target rate one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Give me a
I'm curious about that one. If that's
got it.
Indicative of anything long term. We will ask you about Shavon Revel in a minute. I also want to ask about Tommy Hill, who you were a little bit higher on. 23 years old and 6 foot and a half, 213 pounds, which is heavy for a corner. The heaviest corner in the sample that I have is Patrick Peterson, who was 219 pounds, but nobody else above 211.
So we've got 302 corners drafted in the last decade. So it's a huge sample.
Yeah, huge number, yeah.
Huge sample. So that gives you 32 corners drafted that are in the top 90th plus percentile. So I'm just going to go from the top down. So
and this is, as a reminder, these are the people who were thrown away from the most, essentially.
Exactly. Sauce Gardner, number 1, 8.1%. Kool-Aid McKinstry last year, 8.9%. Garrett Williams, who I was very high on, and he's turned into a starter for Jonathan Gannon in Arizona, 9.1. Jalen Jones, 9.3. Robert Rochelle, smaller school, that's a tough one, 9.4. Patrick Surtain, 9.6. Kamari Lassiter, great rookie year for the Houston Texans, 10.1. L'Jarius Sneed, Louisiana Tech, 10.2.
Coaches know.
Cam Hart, day 3, huge hit for the Chargers last year, became a starter, 10.4. Eric Stokes, 10.4. He was a solid player. Ronald Darby, 10.7. Pretty good indicator.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty good indicator.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's a good one. All right, Shavon Revel, what do you want to talk about?
It's kind of like the Carson Schwesinger conversation where it's
hasn't played
such
a ton.
A small sample. Yeah, only 15 starts, 880 snaps played. The day 1 and day 2 selections with 15 starts. This is that corner. It's a rough list. Will Redmond went day 2 out of Mississippi State, didn't hit. Kelvin Joseph didn't hit for Dallas. Jalen Collins didn't hit for Atlanta. Denzel Ward obviously hit. Quentin Rollins, remember that was a fun profile.
We loved Quentin Rollins
Miami,
back in
Ohio.
the day.
Basketball player, converted to play corner. Didn't work out for Green Bay. Rasul Douglas, he hit, 3rd-round pick. Mike Hughes for Atlanta. It was a little bit of a slow burn, but got there, still starting in the league, so I'd count that as a hit. Marshawn Lattimore hit. Ambry Thomas to back up Benjamin St. Juste, your guy. But very volatile. He had a bad year this past year, but I kind of liked the film. Josh Jackson did not hit for Green Bay. Jeff Okudah did not hit. Isaiah Oliver did not hit. Andrew Booth did not hit. So small sample size corners. It's a very, very low hit rate. Really only 2 blue players, Marshawn Lattimore and Denzel Ward.
And did he, when you watch him, I mean, he's your cornerback 3.
Yes.
So did he walk on water?
He did walk on water. So from that sample of the guys with 15 start, day 1 and day 2 picks, his production score, like again, my production score, no one had a higher one than Shavon Revel. So he had the highest of that group. No one had a longer wingspan. So he's really long. I'm talking like traits. All right, because we're obviously not getting testing because he's coming off the ACL. On the freaks list in the summer, they said he would be a 4.3 guy. So all right, you're talking about the guy with that length and with that speed, with that production. Again, I'm just going off numbers here, but his competitiveness, how aggressive he was coming downhill, what he did in the run game, screen game, really, really caught my eye. Only a couple of guys on that sample had a lower missed tackle rate, and only a couple had a higher percentage of positively graded run plays, according to PFF. So again, just showing an example of, all right, his willingness to play downhill, his competitiveness with the traits, with the production. That's why I'm willing to make that bet.
An older player from a small school without having played that much, you better love what you see.
You have to look. It's the walk on water thing. Yeah.
Corner, by the way, I should say, relative to all the positions, along with running back and wide receiver, the youngest age when they enter the league, which makes sense,
yes,
right?
Sense.
The players are incentivized to come out early if they're that good. And so Revel's a little bit older. Last one, Tommy Hill, who's also 23 years old, 6'1.5", 213. He's on the bigger side for a corner in this sample, but you like him. He's your cornerback 4.
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, this one might be a little bit of a look and feel, a gut feel for me when it comes to Tommy Hill. He is certainly my kind of corner in that he is hyper competitive with good instincts, good ball skills, and I think his best football's ahead of him. He came into college as a wide receiver. He was actually a freshman catching passes from Jaden Daniels at Arizona State, and ended up starting to kind of play both ways. Maybe we're going to move him to corner, but then by midseason, we're moving him back to receiver. There were some games where he played a little bit of both ways, and he did that from Arizona State up till when he transferred to Nebraska. Played in Nebraska in 2023, where he played both ways over the course of the season. It wasn't until this year when he moved to corner full-time, had a good start to the year. His tape against Colorado was awesome. I was really excited about what I saw. Then he got hurt. So it was plantar fasciitis, which if you've ever dealt with that, it sucks. That's a tough one to bounce back from. He missed Julia knows. Yeah, you get out of bed, you're sitting on the couch at any point. It's just sharp pain right up the leg. Basically, the coaches said, all right, you got to take a couple weeks, sit it out. And he was just get me back on the field, get me back on the field, get me back on the field. He gets back on the field, and he didn't look good. That Illinois tape was rough. So all of the numbers, when you're looking at the numbers on Tommy Hill, are not going to paint a pretty picture of what he did this past year. And there's going to be some bad tape out there of Tommy Hill. He goes to this. I talked to him at the combine, and because I was curious about this. I said, what percentage were you at health-wise going down to the Senior Bowl? Because I thought the Senior Bowl, it was a little bit of a rough start. He got a little bit better as the week went on. His best day was day 3, which is red zone day. So, all right, he didn't have to run all that long. Yeah, and that was his best day. So I said, what percent were you health-wise? And he was probably 80%. Most agents, I would say, and from what I understand, talking to people, is that, everyone told him, don't go down to the Senior Bowl because you're not healthy yet. But he was just, itching to play.
Compete.
He wanted to play. And so he was I'm going to go down there and I'm going to play. Didn't look great. His people were don't work out at the combine. Because then I asked him, where are you at health-wise now? He's I'm probably 90%. So, I'm getting there, but I'm not fully back yet. So he didn't work out at the combine, which was good. Because my guess is it probably wasn't going to look great. But I'm going to tell you, man, watching him on film, major vibes of Trayvon Diggs and Xavier Howard. 2 guys that went day 2 of the draft. Big,
fluid
competitive,
athletes.
Ball skills. Yeah, fluid, and hyper competitive. Trayvon Diggs played some receiver as well. So there's similarities in the background there. I just love the film. When he's healthy, I really liked what I saw from Tommy Hill. So that's a little bit of a gut feel for me there.
Brandon in the chat asks, are these rankings available on the website? And I got to tell you, if you have made it this far into this episode and you are not already gobbling up everything that you can on the Die Hard Draft Guide, I mean, you're doing yourself a disservice. All of this stuff is part of the conversation that's on that website. You basically just get there's being John Malkovich, you get to be Fran Duffy. And you get to step inside his brain on the Die Hard Draft Guide. Could not recommend it more. Another corner to ask you about as we get ready to head into overtime here, and this is the last corner.
Okay.
I just want to ask you about Jacob Parrish from Kansas State, under 5'10", 191, but around a 4.35. Does that speed play on tape to you?
It does. He's just a tricky eval for me. In that we were talking about this with with Will Johnson a little bit, where it's like, okay, like there a lot of people think that he's a press man corner, but I think he's actually better in off coverage. I think when you're looking at Jacob Parrish, there's a lot there that would say like, oh, okay, he could be pretty good in playing press man. I mean, he's got that 4.3 speed. And to me, I think that shows up on tape. I think he's pretty poised downfield when the ball's coming. He was flagged 7 times this year, and he held a bunch down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl as well. I thought the penalties showed up there, so he can get a little grabby. But I do think that honestly, like, to me, I think he was better from off coverage, where he could, again, just kind of read and drive on throws and make plays on the ball that way. But he does have like that press man skill set. I think the 4.3 speed does show up on tape.
All right, let's go to safety. And if you have been waiting to talk about someone who is an outlier in the good sense, now is the time, because we can talk about your boy, Nick Emmanwori, who you have been gassing up, and we have talked about him on the show before. But I just want to contextualize how insane of a combine performance that was.
Just take that off, yeah.
So he's 6'3", 220.
Yeah.
So at 220 pounds, which among all of the safeties, there are 40 safeties in the sample, that's the second heaviest guy after Cam Chancellor. At 220, he runs a 4.38, which is the second fastest of all these guys. He jumps 43 inches in the vert, which is tied for the best with Eric Berry. And then he also jumps 138 inches in the broad, which is the best by like a significant margin.
Yeah.
The previous high was 132. What an insane athlete.
Explosive playmaker. The film is really good. Honestly, like I love this player and was not shocked at all. But what he did in Indianapolis, we talked about like the speed score, which is that weight adjusted 40 time, second best speed score of any safety drafted in the last decade. The only one that was better, Josh Jones, when he was coming out of NC State, went to the second round of the Green Bay Packers. Did not work out. From what I understand, that was more like character, like off-field stuff, why that didn't hit. So the other one would be like Obi Melifonwu. He also did not hit. But I think when you're looking at this, I mean, one of the freakiest athletes we've seen at the safety position.
And you see it all of that plays.
All of it plays on film. Yeah, like I honestly have like no concern about his game whatsoever coming in. That doesn't mean that he's a lock to hit, but I feel great about the profile.
Caleb Ransaw, who's much farther down your list of safeties, but did test very well, 4.33, but at 197 pounds, so much different frame that he's working with in a 40-inch vertical jump. Do you see that play on film, and it's more about instincts, or why is he so low for you?
Yeah, that was one of the more shocking ones for me.
Okay.
Because he is actually listed as a corner by most services. And so he was a guy like when I watched him, he's played in the nickel. He's been a slot corner for really the last 2 seasons. He was a straight corner in 2022, then moved to the slot and was like primarily in the slot the last 2 seasons for Tulane. And I remember when he got announced for the Senior Bowl, I put out a tweet saying basically I think this guy's might have to move to safety. He's been mostly a nickel corner, and Jim Nagy responded right away and was like, yeah, he's going to get safety looks in Mobile. And he kind of bounced between both spots, played some nickel, played some safety, but running 4.33, I did not see that's coming. Now again, that goes to that's a good thing for a guy to outperform, from an athletic testing standpoint. So now, does he always play to that? Clearly not, based off what I've seen on tape. But I like the competitiveness, and to me, when I look at the body type, I do think he's probably more of a nickel. But yeah, that was a surprising test number.
All right, last guy who we have talked about before, but itty bitty Billy Bowman, 5'9".
I don't think I've ever heard him described that way.
Just under 5'10", 28.5-inch arms. That's by far lower than anybody else in this sample. 8 5/8-inch hands. I mean, is this a special teamer? Is this a guy who you can hide on defense because offense won't be able to see him and then he can surprise him?
He's a good football player. I do think that he can start in the NFL.
He's your safety 6.
Yeah. Now here's what I did. I told you I have it all color coded. Right? Yeah. So I said, okay, let me go through the safeties, the guys that were in the red for height, weight, hand size, arm length, wingspan, which he is in the red for all, and like in the single-digit percentile for all. Here's the list of 5 safeties drafted in the last decade that were in the red at all spots.
Okay. Eddie Goodell.
Yeah. Jordan Whitehead,
Oh, okay.
starter.
Yeah.
Buda Baker,
Okay.
starter. Good, great starter. Jamie Robinson, who was a day 3 pick in 2023 out of Florida State. Jaquan Johnson, day 3 pick out of Miami in 2019. And then last year, Javon Bullard, who became a day 1 starter for the Green Bay Packers. Good player.
Okay.
So three out of 5 were starters.
Well, it's one of those things where, like, if you are that small and can overcome it to be a draftable player, there must be something to you.
It's not a problem unless it's a problem. That goes back to it's not a problem unless it's a problem.
Okay. Billy Bowman.
I like a Billy Bowman.
All right.
It's like the Willie Lampkin at safety.
I am not a dime a dozen. I am Billy Bowman, and you are Biff Bowman.
I felt like that. I feel so much better about that conversation than last week. I feel like
That was good.
I wish I could.
You had a lot of
week.
homework. It was
I did. It was a lot of.
Yeah.
It was a couple hours of research this morning, but well worth it.
It was good. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know what we do from here.
Well, next week we want to do the positive outliers.
Yeah.
Is that something
Well,
like that?
the guys who you like.
The guys who we like based and like the numbers that support it. Okay, I like that.
Okay. All right, that'll do it for the PHLY Draft Show with Fran Duffy. Thank you for joining us. We will be back at 2 o'clock for the PHLY Eagles Show. We're going to have a little draft-focused conversation, more specifically tailored to the Eagles on that show. And, of course, we will be back on the PHLY Draft Show next Tuesday at noon. Again, we look forward to that. Thanks for watching and listening. We'll talk to you later. For Fran, I'm Bo. We'll see you next time.
We all silly like the mayor.